The UK general election held yesterday produced a very surprising result, but in some ways it was no surprise. The surprise is that the UK now has a hung parliament, and that Prime Minister Theresa May seems to have ruined her career. It seems unclear if she will remain as Prime Minister, and if she does, how long will she remain? So why has this happened? Well, she went for an election 7 weeks ago thinking that she had a very large lead in the polls. But the result of the election last night is that she's going to have fewer seats than she had in the last parliament, and the main opposition Labour Party have gained seats. She can't command a majority in the House of Commons. I've got with me here Andrew Hawkins, who's one of the leading commentators in the UK and the executive chairman of a polling company, Comraz. Now, Andrew, your polls and everybody else's polls, they weren't really that far off, were they? You were saying it was going to be 43, 44, 46%, and that Labour were going to get maybe 34, 35, 36. So is this hung parliament surprising?
Well, Peter, you refer to it as being a surprise, but I think we shouldn't just look at the voting intention shares, the vote shares themselves. When we look at everything in its proper context, then it suddenly becomes clear. It's very obvious that many of the foundations were in place for the Conservatives to do well, because the United Kingdom Independence Party, which picked up 12% of the total national vote share in 2015, their vote was collapsing, and at least half of that vote was forecast to go to the Conservatives. And what's happened overnight is that Labour has picked up votes from the other smaller parties, the Green Party, the Liberal Democrats, but importantly they've picked up more than expected from the United Kingdom Independence Party, and that's created complete disruption in a lot of marginal seats. There were dozens of marginal seats that were expected to switch to the Conservatives, and they didn't, and that's what's left us in this predicament.
Right. And so you say it's a predicament. What does it mean? A lot of the people who'll be watching this may not be familiar with the British system. So what's this British two-party system, this first past the post? What does that normally do, and how is this different? Yesterday, the result we got, how is that different from normal?
Well, in order to pass legislation, you need to have a majority of MPs in the House of Commons who vote in favour of it. There are 650 MPs, so you need 326 on your side, either in a single party or in a coalition, a formal agreement with another party, in order to bring that about. And the problem that Theresa May has got is that when she went into this election in the first place, she had a small majority. She had a working majority of around 12 seats, and now she's actually lost MPs, so she finds herself unable to govern. The Conservative Party is now unable to govern on its own, and the significance of this moment in time is that with Article 50 triggered, it means that the process for leaving the European Union has begun. There is a 2-year period of negotiation. There will need to be transposed into UK law literally thousands of pieces of European legislation, and what it means is that possibly a group of 2, even as few as 2 or 3 MPs out of 650, if they decide to vote the wrong way on a single piece of legislation, it means it doesn't get passed into law. So we're in real trouble with this, and the business community in particular is looking for certainty, and having had a 7-week disruptive campaign, all of the uncertainty in the wake of the European referendum to leave the EU in 2016, this just signals yet more uncertainty, which is the last thing that British business needs at the moment.
So you're saying that this Brexit process, it had looked a little bit more certain, although we didn't know what Brexit was really going to look like yesterday, but now it's not so certain. I mean, is there any chance that Brexit might not go ahead, or what does it mean for Brexit?
Until last night, it was unthinkable that Brexit wouldn't proceed. The negotiations are already due to begin in 11 days' time. We're that close to the process formally commencing, and already it looks, just a few hours into the full result being known, it already looks as if those negotiations will be postponed. And I think it's reasonable to assume that the whole process is now in jeopardy. I'm not saying that the UK will not leave the European Union. I'm just saying that the process looks more uncertain now than it has at any time over the past 12 months.
And you talk about uncertainty there. So is there uncertainty around Theresa May?
Theresa May's position is incredibly difficult, and already some of her own senior backbench MPs, her senior colleagues, have signalled that they think that her position is in some difficulty, that questions need to be asked. And I think for the Conservative Party's own supporters, and for many, especially in the business community, they're asking perfectly reasonable questions now, because this was not an election that needed to be called. We have fixed-term Parliament still, although Theresa May has vowed that she's going to repeal the Fixed-Term Parliament Act, requiring an election every 5 years. Still, at the moment, we've only had an election 2 years ago. We didn't need to have an election until 2020. This didn't need to be called. It calls into question Theresa May's political judgment. She was prepared to risk stability in order to gain an advantage in the number of MPs that she's got, intended, as she put it, to give her stability and a proper mandate to see through those negotiations to leave the EU. Now all of that looks in tatters, and the real danger for the Conservatives is if they begin to look incompetent with their own supporters, it'll take them years to recover their reputation.
So about a year ago we had the Brexit referendum, and it was expected that that referendum would be Remain, and because it was exit, the Prime Minister David Cameron stood down very quickly, in fact, the next day. Is there any prospect that this might happen with Theresa May? Are we in similar territory here, or do we just don't know?
I think we are in a different position today. Given the precarious nature now of the Conservative Party's ability to form a government, and given that we've triggered Article 50, the process of leaving the EU has begun, we do need to have some stability at any cost, and I think it's incumbent really on Theresa May to stay at the helm of the ship and try and steer the government through whatever tricky waters it has over the coming weeks and possibly months. It's going to take the Conservative Party a while to figure out what they do once Theresa May does decide that she wishes to resign. But the big problem is Theresa May's replacement is going to need a mandate of their own. Otherwise they're going to be facing exactly the same problem that she's got now. And this is a problem of her making. And any new Conservative leader is going to be terrified to go back to the country, call a third election in 3 years, because they'll look at what happened last night and realise that may end up resulting in Jeremy Corbyn winning the keys to number 10, and Jeremy Corbyn is regarded as somebody who is completely inappropriate as a leader for the country. He's never held high office. He's regarded as being a very hard-line left-winger who would do untold damage to the economy. And the Conservative Party would never be forgiven by their own supporters if they allowed that to happen. And they came jolly close to it last night.
Well, it was interesting you said there that there possibly be a third election in 3 years. That's something nobody was thinking about last night. What are the prospects of a third election in 3 years? You were talking there about a third election being called by a prospective Prime Minister who's a Conservative whose name we don't know. But could the system force another election? And how would it force another election?
A third election is eminently possible now. It may not be for a few months, but if the government cannot get its legislative programme through, then the government has to fall. And in a couple of weeks' time, we're going to be having a Queen's speech. So the Queen will come to Parliament, to open Parliament, and she will read out a summary of the government's legislative programme for the coming year. And if that programme cannot find its way through to win the support of a majority of MPs, even if that requires 2, 3, 4 parties to cobble together their support, then the government will fall, and it's inevitable that we'll have another election, irrespective of whether the Prime Minister, if that's Theresa May, if it's one of her colleagues who takes over, irrespective of whether they want it or not. I think we really are, on this occasion, staring down the barrel of a gun.
Right, and just to sum up then, so we've got three things, and they all look pretty uncertain. One is that we don't know what's going to happen to Brexit. The second one is we don't know how long Theresa May is going to last. And the third one is we don't know if there is going to be a third general election. That's pretty fair to say, isn't it?
That is exactly right. And British business needs this like a hole in the head. We've had the election of 2 years ago, resulting in the surprise referendum that David Cameron called in June last year that led to his resignation and the replacement of him with Theresa May. We've now had this election. We just need everything to calm down. We need things to settle down so that we can complete the Brexit process from a position of strength as well for the British negotiating position to actually carry some weight. And bearing in mind as well, the reason we had this election in the first place was because Theresa May wanted to go into those negotiations with a proper mandate. And not only is she's found that mandate whipped away from her, she's found herself in a far, far worse position than she was 7 weeks ago.
That's great. Thanks very much for your time, Andrew. Myself and the crew now are going to take a bit of a walk down to Downing Street and just see if anything's happening.
Very good.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Very nice to meet you.
So now we'll take a trip from here, which is called College Green, just to the north of the Houses of Parliament. We'll walk past the Houses of Parliament, through Parliament Square, just past the main offices of the government, which is the Foreign Office and the Treasury, and we'll go to Downing Street just to see what's happening there. There's like to be a lot of police, maybe a crowd, and quite a bit of media as well, and possibly the Prime Minister, but we don't know. We'll find out. Let's go. So all this area around here is a kind of media village with foreign media and all the UK media and the major broadcasters gathered to do live pieces to camera with the Houses of Parliament in the background. If you look at this very large tower here, this is the largest tower called Victoria Tower on the Houses of Parliament. The entrance at the bottom is only ever used by the Queen, just once every year when she comes to open Parliament. That's where she parks her coach. The block to its left is a series of offices and meeting rooms. There are two principal chambers inside the Houses of Parliament, House of Lords and the House of Commons. The Lords is at this end and the House of Commons is at the other end. Hiya. Okay. more and more media. This is actually quite a big media event, even by the standards of British elections. The fact that it seems to be uncertain seems to have caught the interests of people from all around the world. Here in the background is the Westminster Abbey, which is where Prince William and Kate got married in 2011. This large building over here is a very long hall called the Great Hall of Westminster. It's the oldest part of the palace and dates back about 700 or 800 years. The statue in the front is of Oliver Cromwell, who's the only non-king to have ruled Britain in the past 1,000 years. He won the English Civil War against King Charles I and even had Charles I executed. But only a few years after Oliver Cromwell's death, the monarchy was restored and has been ruling the country ever since. The large tower, of course, is Big Ben, which everybody recognises. We're just coming up to the main vehicle entrance to the House of Commons, and it was here that the terror attack took place several weeks ago. This is the entrance where the terrorists came in, and since then it's been shut. And you can see the policemen in the background with their guns, and the policemen at the front here on duty. This is Parliament Square, and here's the statue to Winston Churchill, the British leader during the Second World War. The statue behind him is of David Lloyd George, who was the British leader during the First World War. The pair of them were friends for many years and also served in the same cabinet and in the same political party. Looking down here is Whitehall. Most of the buildings on the left are government buildings. Only some of the buildings on the right are government buildings. This building here immediately on the left is the Treasury. Yeah.
Just like this. Don't put it.
And we will stand here.
We will stand here.
Will we?
I don't know.
Okay.
Up to you.
Okay. I'll wait until you've dialed. Now we've walked past the Treasury, and the building we're coming up to here on the left is the Foreign Office. These buildings were built in the 1850s. They're very big and they're very grand. This building here is the cenotaph, which was built just in the immediate aftermath of the First World War to commemorate the nearly 1 million dead soldiers from Britain and what was then the Empire. Every year it's the centre of a remembrance celebration, and you can even see the wreaths of poppies that are left there. Most of them have rotted a bit, but they're all still there at the moment from this year's celebrations. Yeah. That's where the cars go in.